late to the party, but I'm going to be dropping my UFC 309 predictions and breakdown of the card. So let's get right into it. Let's not waste any time. Into the absolute banger of Veronica Hardy versus Eduardo Moura. Now listen, dude, if you don't know that this is a Fight of the Year contender, then you're really not a hardcore MMA fan. I mean, this is just one for the ages, boys. We got Dan Hardy's wife, Veronica Hardy, facing off against the GOAT of women's MMA, Eduardo Moura. In all seriousness, guys, not too many people are going to care about this fight. I'm probably going to take a bathroom break during it. But I am going to pick Eduardo Moura. She's seems to be better all around, and yeah, I haven't really watched too many of their fights, but from what I've seen, Eduardo Moura seems to be the better fighter. So I'm going to pick her by decision over Veronica Hardy because a women's fight by decision is always a safe pick. So Eduardo Moura by decision. Let's move on to the next fight on the card. We got Basel Hafez versus Oban Elliott. Oban Elliott from Wales, pretty solid fighter, really good striker, and then we got Basel Hafez, a really good pressure fighter, and yeah, he didn't look as good in his fight against Mickey Gall as he did against Jack Della Maddalena. We all know that. 3-2 in his last 5, whereas Oban Elliott is on a win streak. But you know what? I'm still riding high on Basel Hafez, even though he didn't look great against Mickey Gall. I'm still going to pick him against Oban Elliott. I don't know, man. Something about fighters from Wales that just don't hit for me. Nah, respect to Wales. But I am going to go with Basel Hafez. I think he's going to put the pressure on Oban Elliott and win a 29-28 decision across 3 rounds. That's my prediction. Basel Hafez will probably lose the 3rd round because he has a suspect gas tank. His gas tank is very questionable at times, let's say. So he'll probably win the first 2 rounds, and then he'll gas out a bit in the 3rd. Probably will do enough to win the 2nd round, but he'll gas out beginning of the 3rd and drop the 3rd round. So Basel Hafez by a decision. I don't see a finish in this fight, but who knows? Let's move on to the next fight on this card. We got Mickey Gall versus Ramiz Brahimaj. Now, I'm not going to lie. Both these guys suck. Mickey Gall, 1-4 in his last 5. His biggest claim to fame is losing to Diego Sanchez and beating Sage Northcutt like 20 years ago. And then Ramiz Brahimaj might be one of the most mid fighters we've ever seen in the UFC. Just terrible all around. So this fight really, like, why is Mickey Gall still in the UFC? Can somebody tell me that? He's just not good. He never was. Ramiz Brahimaj shouldn't be in the UFC either. They both kind of suck. Mickey Gall got destroyed by Mike Malott, and then he lost to Basel Hafez in his last fight. Kind of got outworked. And then Ramiz Brahimaj, I don't really follow his career too much, but from what I've seen, he's not great. Dude, it's painful to say, but I'm going to go with Mickey Gall, dude. I don't know. I feel like Mickey Gall is going to win this fight. Dude, isn't it crazy that if Mickey Gall loses this fight, he's going to be 7-7 in his career? Wasn't this guy undefeated whenever he faced Sage Northcutt, like 4-0 or something? That's actually crazy. Bro started off 4-0, and now he's like 3-6 in the UFC in his last 9. Either way, both these guys kind of suck. They're never going to do anything in their careers, but I'm tempted to pick Mickey Gall, and I will. I'm going to pick Mickey Gall to beat Ramiz Brahimaj by 29-28 decision. I don't see a finish in this fight. I think if it does get finished, Mickey Gall will probably be the one to get finished, but Mickey Gall by... I'm going to go... Actually, you know what? I'm going to go by submission. I'm going to go Mickey Gall by submission in the 2nd round. That's what I'm going to take. Let's move on up the card to the next fight. We got absolute banger, dude. Why is this not on the main card, brother? Marcin the GOAT Tybura versus Jonata Deniz. Listen, Marcin Tybura is 39 years old. He's been cooked by anyone who's a decent heavyweight. 25-9. Don't get me wrong. Marcin Tybura has all the experience in the world. He has solid striking. He has a solid ground game, but he's not great anywhere. He doesn't, and he has negative power for a heavyweight, I'll be honest. Jonathan Deniz seems to be better, more dangerous for sure. Definitely finishing more fights than Marcin Tybura. So I'm going to go with Jonata Deniz by probably a 2nd round TKO. Marcin Tybura is just cooked. He's took a lot of damage in his career. He's been beat up so many times in the UFC, and he's 39 years old. So I know heavyweights can go longer, but Marcin Tybura is just taking so much damage. So I got to take Jonata Deniz by a 2nd round TKO. Let's move on up the card to the next fight. We got Jim Miller versus the hairline GOAT Damon Jackson. Listen, Jim Miller, he's a legend. He's fought at UFC 100, 200, and 300. But let's be real. The dude got absolutely pieced up and destroyed by Bobby Green at UFC 300. Fair enough, he's taking some time off. But Jim Miller's, 41 years old? He turned 41 in August. And Damon Jackson's 36. And yeah, I think Damon Jackson's pressured wrestling hump style, he'll just push Jim Miller up against the fence and wrestle hump him to a decision. Maybe even do some half guard camping. I think he's just going to wrestle hump Jim Miller into a decision. Jim Miller probably won't take much, if any, damage this fight because Damon Jackson's not really that dangerous in the striking enough to do damage. So maybe Jim Miller can pull off a submission, but I doubt it. Like I said, he's 41. At some point, you're not going to have any testosterone left. Just look at Tony Ferguson. But Jim Miller, he's still got a little gas in the tank maybe, but I do think it's time to retire. I thought he was going to retire after UFC 300, being that he said that fighting at UFC 100, 200, and 300, the only fighter to do that. Maybe he was going to call it, but he's still fighting respect, but I'm still going to go with Damon Jackson. He's younger. He's taking less damage. And, yeah, he's probably just going to wrestle hump Jim Miller to a decision win. So Damon Jackson by a 29-28 decision. That's what I'm going with, boys. Maybe I'll go 30-27. He can win every round. Let's move on up the card to the GOAT, Christopher Weidman versus Eric Anders. Now, listen, I've been very critical of this card. I don't think this card's great, but this fight should absolutely be on the main card over Karine Silva versus Viviane Araujo. I mean, this is a joke that this is on the prelims for what this card is. Either way, listen, Eric Anders might be one of the most mid fighters in UFC history. I mean, he doesn't do anything great. He's just kind of a decent fighter everywhere, but he doesn't have great submissions. He doesn't have great knockout power. He doesn't have great boxing, great kickboxing. He's just okay. Like nothing special. That's kind of what Eric Anders is. He's like another version of like Marvin Vettori. Like he's okay everywhere, but he doesn't really stand out. He's just kind of like there. He's a decent fighter. Chris Weidman, it's always worrying whenever you see a fighter like Chris Weidman come off of a extremely bad leg break like he did, but after post leg break, he did come back to get a 1-2 eye poke win over Bruno Silva, which Bruno Silva now hates Chris Weidman for, if you didn't know. But either way, I do think Chris Weidman's just better everywhere than Eric Anders. I think he has better striking, definitely better wrestling, better jiu-jitsu. So even Chris Weidman at 40 years old, I am going to pick him. I think he can beat Eric Anders pretty comfortably. But I think Chris Weidman's still going to look sloppy, but Eric Anders is so shit that it won't even matter. So give me Chris Weidman by a decision. I don't think Chris Weidman is capable of finishing anybody these days just because he's older, he's slow. He had a gruesome leg injury. I mean, how much can Chris Weidman really push outside of eye poking opponents? And Chris Weidman's going to be in rare form with those eye pokes because they're bringing back the old gloves for this card, boys. So look out for a Chris Weidman 1-2 eye poke down the pipe to finish Eric Anders. I'm going Chris Weidman by second round eye poke, TKO. Nah, I'm going Chris Weidman by a decision in this fight, 30-27. I think he's going to win every round. Eric Anders is just mid. He's never been anything special, and I've always thought that. I mean, I've never been impressed by a single Eric Anders performance. So yeah, Chris Weidman by a decision. Moving on up the card, Jonathan Martinez versus Marcus McGee. Now, listen, first of all, Marcus McGee looks like a GTA character. Let's get that out of the way. But he's an amazing striker. The issue I have with Marcus McGee is that he's old, dude. He started MMA late. The dude's 34 years old. And yeah, he's a good fighter, and he's jacked. Look at this picture. But Jonathan Martinez, I feel like, is being underrated in this fight. Everybody's like, oh, dude, Marcus McGee's like the dark horse. He's going to come in and destroy Jonathan Martinez. Listen, let's not forget that Jonathan Martinez has some of the most dangerous leg kicks in the entire division. He finished Adrian Yanez with leg kicks. And then who else did he finish with leg kicks? I forget the other guy he finished with leg kicks. Drop it in the comments. But he finished two guys via leg kicks, really strong leg kicks. So if Marcus McGee stands heavy on his lead foot like a lot of boxers do, because he has a boxing style, I think Jonathan Martinez can chew up his legs. And I think a lot of people are just writing off Jonathan Martinez because he kind of got pieced up by Aldo. But listen, man, he wasn't a coward enough to hold Aldo against the cage for 5 rounds and coast to a decision. He stood in the pocket with Aldo and traded, and Aldo just had the better speed and better technique overall, and he was able to bust up Jonathan Martinez. But I think Jonathan Martinez can win this fight. This is a close fight. I would not be surprised if Marcus McGee won, but I'm going to go Jonathan Martinez by 29-28 decision. I could see this being a split decision. It's just being a back-and-forth fight. A lot of people thinks that Marcus McGee is just going to outstrike and dominate Jonathan Martinez. I don't see that. Martinez is still good. Just because he lost to Aldo doesn't mean he's not good. So give me Jonathan Martinez by a decision, 29-28. I think this card's going to have a lot of decisions, as you can see. Let's move on up the card. Mauricio Ruffy versus James Lontop. Now, listen, I think this fight was moved out to 165. I'm not sure of the reason yet. I'm sure somebody had weight-cutting issues or some kind of sickness. Either way, this is obviously a fight the UFC is putting on for Mauricio Ruffy, the real Conor McGregor, to just destroy James Lontop. James Lontop, he's not good. He's 0-2 in the UFC. He just isn't impressive. And, yeah, I'm gonna go. I think this fight was tailor made for Mauricio Ruffy to go in there, just absolutely put on a clinic against James Lontop and probably KO him in the first round. So yeah, I don't think James Lontop has anything from Mauricio Ruffy. Mauricio Ruffy's like 20 times the striker he is. And the fight nerds are on a run right now, brother. They're not losing anytime soon. Mauricio Ruffy is him. They're fighting every weekend. Carlos Prates last weekend, Mauricio Ruffy this weekend. So I'm going with Mauricio Ruffy by a first round KO. That's my prediction for this fight. Maybe not one shot as his name suggests. Maybe he'll be a knockdown and then he'll TKO James Lontop on the ground. First round, that's my prediction. Let's move on up the card. Viviane Araujo versus Karine Silva. Now, listen, I'm not a fan of this fight being on the main card. It's an MSG card. No shot you should have this on the main card. Put Chris Weidman on the main card, even though that's not worthy either. At least Chris Weidman's from New York, and he's a big name. He's been champion, so I think that fight deserves to be on the main card over this fight. But either way, Viviane Araujo is cooked. She's 36 years old, maybe even 37, in the flyweight division. 2-3 in her last 5. She did face decent competition, but she's just not impressive. Like, I've never been impressed by Viviane Araujo. Karine Silva, I think she's on a 9-fight win streak. She actually has a lot of finishes in her career, which is rare for the women fighters. So I'm going to go by Karine Silva getting it done by a TKO. I think Viviane Araujo is old, is flyweight. I mean, she's going to be slower. Karine Silva seems to be in her prime. 5-0 in her last 5. I mean, what else is there to say? Karine Silva by a TKO in the second round. That's my prediction, boys, and I'm sticking with it. Let's move on to the next fight on this card. We got Bo Nickal, the GOAT, versus Paul Craig, Bear Jew. Listen, Paul Craig might have some of the worst striking in the entire UFC. I mean, this dude genuinely strikes with his eyes closed and like he's underwater. It's embarrassing. But he has a dangerous guard game, and he has some of the most dangerous triangles and arm bars in the entire UFC. Doesn't matter if he was submitted by Brendan Allen, I believe. Doesn't matter if he's been outgrappled before. If you get into Paul Craig's guard, you're always at risk of losing the fight. Just look at what happened to Nikita Krylov. He was beating Paul Craig's ass, and Nikita Krylov locked up a triangle, and that was a wrap. Look what happened to Magomed Ankalaev. Literally tapped him out with 1 second in the fight to go. But I think Bo Nickal's smart, and I think he's going to keep it on the feet. And honestly, I think Bo Nickal's going to get a first-round TKO over Paul Craig. Even Bo Nickal, who's like very like amateur in his striking himself, has better striking than Paul Craig. Bo Nickal has natural power too, so I think he's going to just keep it on the feet with his wrestling because Paul Craig's not going to get Bo Nickal down. It's 0% chance. If Bo Nickal goes down, it'll be because he fell on top of Paul Craig, not because Paul Craig took him down. Paul Craig has a really great ability to get the fight to the ground. So I'm going to take Bo Nickal by a first-round TKO, and then hopefully we get him a better step up in competition. Listen, I know Paul Craig's a dangerous fight for Bo Nickal given his, his submission ability. But Paul Craig's 1-4 in his last 5. He's also 36 years old. He's taking a lot of damage. And yeah, he doesn't have the best chin. So Bo Nickal by a first-round TKO I'm going with. I think he'll keep it on the feet, and he'll bust up Paul Craig until they step in. Let's move on to the co-main event, the rematch between Charlie Olives and Michael Chandler. Now, this is interesting because Michael Chandler has taken 2 years off. Now, this could either be the worst decision he's ever made or the best decision. Was the 2 years off good enough to heal his body and his mind and really take a break from all that damage he was taking against Poirier and Gaethje and Oliveira? Like, he took a lot of damage in his UFC career. He is 2-3 in the UFC with his only wins coming versus Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson, which hasn't aged very well. But Charles Oliveira looked very lackluster in his Arman fight. Maybe not lackluster. He looked okay, but Charles Oliveira never does good against those, like, Middle Eastern, like, Russian, Georgian-esque grappler kind of guys. He never does good against those guys. But whenever he's fighting like a Michael Chandler, a Justin Gaethje, a Dustin, I mean, he just steps into the fire and looks to make it a 50-50 fight and ready to knock out the opponent, So Charlie Olives versus Michael Chandler. Who am I going to pick in this matchup? Honestly, Michael Chandler is going to be 39 in April. He hasn't fought for 2 years. I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. He's been more active. I think he's coming in here with something to prove after the loss to Arman. He has a fire to get his belt back. So I'm going to pick Charles Oliveira probably by a first-round submission. I think he's going to submit Michael Chandler in the first round. Michael Chandler is going to be rusty. He's not going to be feeling himself. He's going to be thinking about that red panty night from Conor McGregor while he's in the middle of the octagon. So give me Charles Oliveira to submit Michael Chandler in the second round. No, the first round. First round submission by Charles Oliveira. That's what I'm going with. And the main event, Yes, the fight everyone's been waiting for, dude. Screw Tom Aspinall, dude. We've been all waiting for Jon Jones versus Stipe. No, we know this should be Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. I've drove that point home all week. Either way, it's the matchup we're getting. Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, branded as the greatest light heavyweight versus the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time. Fair enough. That's a fair argument. The only asterisk on that is that Stipe is 42 years old. He hasn't fought in nearly 4 years, coming off a KO loss, and he hasn't had a win since 2020. That's nearly 5 years. And yeah, so we have old man Stipe coming in versus old man Jones, honestly. And honestly, I think Jon Jones is going to win this fight, but I think this fight is going to leave a lot to be desired. I think Jon Jones is going to win this fight, but he might look a little lackluster. That's what I think. I think we're going to see Jon Jones slow and sloppy on the feet because he's old. He's an old man coming off a pectoral injury, and I think he's going to look slow and sloppy in there, but I think he is going to still be good enough to dominate a 42-year-old Stipe. I think he can. Honestly, he's probably just going to play it safe. Maybe the first round, the second round, kind of just fill out the range, fill out the octagon, and then probably in the third round, early third round, you might see Jon Jones shooting some takedowns and looking for some submissions against Stipe, or maybe he keeps it standing. Who knows? But guys, how funny would it be if Jon Jones were to get KO'd by 42-year-old Stipe Miocic? His whole resume would be down the drain, and this whole GOAT thing would be put to rest. But it's not going to happen. Jon Jones is going to win by a third-round TKO, I imagine. Listen, I've heard stories of Stipe having some of the best submission defense in heavyweight history. He's really hard to submit. Even Overeem with a tight guillotine couldn't submit him. Verdum got KO'd, granted than everyone on the ground, but Verdum, who submitted all the other great heavyweights, didn't submit Stipe. So I think Stipe is good enough to not get submitted, but I think Jon Jones can dominate it good enough to where he can get a finish in like the maybe late third round TKO for Jon Jones. That's my prediction. Listen, boys, that's it for the predictions for the UFC 309 card. I do think this card is pretty mid, but these are my picks. I wish it was Aspinall versus Jones, but we got Jones versus Stipe. I'm still going to watch because I'm a UFC fan no matter what. It is what it is. Let me know what you think of my picks in the comments. Am I casual? Are they garbage? Are they good? Let me know if you do agree or disagree. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'm out. Peace.